My aunt died about a week ago now, and I was in her hospital room as she died. And I was praying. And as I prayed, I tried to close my eyes, because that's normally how I pray. I close my eyes to get close to the Spirit that is around me, so I can listen to that Spirit, hear what that Spirit has to tell me. And I closed my eyes, but I couldn't keep them closed. They kept fluttering wide open. And I remembered something that is true for me. In every single hospital room that I've been in, or room I've been in when someone is dying, I cannot close my eyes. When someone is dying, when there is incredible pain and a yearning to live, my eyes will not shut. The song that we just heard, I Can't Keep Silent. When someone can't keep silent, will my ears be open to hear the truth that they need to tell? Will my eyes be open to see the truth that I need to see to be a part of the transformation, to save them from dying? Whoever wishes to may sit in meditation with eyes closed to know if the world be true or false. I meanwhile shall sit with hungry eyes to see the world while the light lasts. My colleague, the Reverend Victoria Safford, says it this way: to see clearly is an act of will and conscience. It will make you very vulnerable. It is persistent, holy, world-transforming work. This is a service today about opening our eyes, our ears, and our hearts so that when someone tells us the pain that they are in, we can respond. Natasha McKenna, 37, of Alexandria, died after she was restrained with handcuffs and leg shackles and shocked 4 times. After the shocks were administered, she stopped breathing, was taken to a hospital, and died several days later. The death of Natasha McKenna, a Black woman who was mentally ill, has been ruled accidental. Will you say her name? Natasha McKenna. Black women are outnumbered by white women 5-1 in the United States, yet are killed by police in nearly the same numbers. As we move through this sermon, I will give us opportunities to say the names, to speak them aloud in this space. And after each name, we will pause briefly for a moment with our eyes wide open. Corin Gaines was shot and killed after an hours-long standoff with Baltimore County Police. Gaines was the 9th Black woman killed by police in just the first 8 months of 2016. Say her name, Corin Gaines. Corin Gaines. Why are we looking at Black women who have been killed by the police? Not because all police are transgressors, but because we give them tremendous power. And the most vulnerable in our society are victims to the misuse of that power. Pinpointing our vision, there we see the brokenness of our interdependent web, we see who is lost, who is forgotten. We see who is nameless, who has the burden of being our society's collateral damage. And we are doing this work now because it is morally necessary. We are also doing it because on Yom Kippur, the holiest of days, our Jewish kin work to keep their eyes wide open so they may see their and their community's transgressions. And in the embrace of community, they account for all they have done and been that has caused hurt and pain. Their work is accountability, forgiveness, and then transformation. May it be so for us as well. I've been spending a lot of time recently in a laundromat. The machines in our apartment building are broken. Each new space that we enter in our lives is a chance to keep our eyes wide open. At this laundromat, my eyes were open. There was a young man, a boy, a black boy, sitting on the laundry counter right next to me where I was folding clothes. The owner came over and quickly just swished past the boy and said, "Get down." And then he walked around the corner and he talked to a black man at a machine who was dressed nicely, an older black man who was trying to put some money into the laundry machine. And he said, "Sir, can I help you with that? Do you have a problem? Can I help you do that?" What did I see in this situation? The boy was nameless. Get down. The man at the machine was sir. There are valuations at work in our society. Calculations that say one is worthy and another is not. To see clearly is an act of will and conscience, and it will make you very vulnerable. To see is to be accountable to and for one another. To be accountable to the boy who was not given a name. In the break between services, I heard a beautiful idea. If you were in that situation like me, you could have put your arm around the young boy and said, "Sweetheart," or "Dear," to give him a name and to hold him, be accountable to his humanity. Women of color and other marginalized populations experience violence disproportionately. 20% of white females experience violent crime. 27% of black females experience violent crime. 1.5% of white females endure rape in their lifetime. 4% of black females endure rape in their lifetime. 1.5, 4. The numbers for those who endure sexual violence are also much higher for gay, mentally ill, trans women, etc., etc. And these are very low statistics because they rely on reporting. Additionally, marginalized women face increased barriers in seeking help. These barriers range from fear of the criminal justice systems to lack of financial security to fear of deportation. While many of the experiences of survivors, of course, cut across racial and ethnic lines, not all violence is acknowledged or responded to equally, and some victims go unrecognized, unnamed altogether. Perhaps we know the names of Sophie Dix or Larissa Gomez, 2 of the 87 women who accused one famous man this year of sexual violence. But you know what? We know the man's name much better. It has been in the news over and over again. I'm not going to say it right now, though, because this is not a sermon about him. This is a sermon about the names that we don't hear. It is a sermon about the accountability we don't have, not yet, to the nameless and to the unseen. This past year at our General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association, our Right Relations team, which we call from within ourselves to hold us accountable to our principles, told us this in front of one of our assemblies. They said, this year we are called to be, as we always are, anti-racist. We are called to undo racism in our midst and in the world at large. And we hear you that this is what you want to do, but we don't always see it. And then they told us of a story, a true story, of a Black Unitarian Universalist who was trying to enter into the convention hall, who had been stopped by the police because he didn't have his name badge. And the Right Relations team told us about all of the white Unitarian Universalists that walked past the man and didn't intervene. Did we trust the police more than the man in that instance? What can we do to be accountable to those that need us the most? We have a Black Lives banner, fixed Black Lives Matter banner fixed to our congregation's front. We have it there because we are asking ourselves, just like the Right Relations team asked that assembly, to keep our eyes wide open. We have it there because we affirm that this is our faithful work, our religious calling, to announce that there is a beloved community to which we are accountable and that we are not there yet. Amen. Police officers in Los Angeles killed Keisha Michael. Known as a great mother of 3, Michael was found sitting in a car unconscious. After allegedly failing to revive her and then finding a gun, police retreated and then fired several rounds into the car, killing Michael and the man who was with her. Keisha Michael, say her name. From Audre Lorde, the Black lesbian poet and author in 1979. The oppression of women knows no ethnic nor racial boundaries, true, but that does not mean that it is identical within those boundaries. To deal with one without even alluding to the other is to distort our commonality as well as our difference. Voices have been calling to us for decades, like Audre Lorde and many, many others, for decades, to fuse our work of undoing racism with our work for those who identify as women, our work for those who are poor with those who identify as women, our work for gay rights, lesbian rights, transgender rights, with the work for those who identify as women, so that we don't do more harm than good. Cherry Morega, a Chicana writer and feminist activist, shared this powerful critique in 1983. She said, "Racism is societal and institutional. It implies the power to implement racist ideology. Women of color do not have such power, but white women are born with it. And the greater their economic privilege, the greater their power. And she says, this is how white middle-class women emerge among feminist ranks as the greatest propagators of racism in the movement. That's tough to hear, isn't it? And it is necessary. Eyes, ears, wide open. This is not just me saying this. This is decades of writers and activists and teachers, some of whom you might know their names, many of whom I don't, not yet, but I'm learning. In another section, Morega continues, the calculated system of damage done to us as women is intended to ensure our separation from other women. But particularly those we learn to see as the most different from ourselves, whether they are gay, black, trans, mentally ill, poor, and therefore those we are most afraid of. The women whose pain we do not want to see as our own. The calculated system of damage is intended to ensure our separation. A few years back, I learned from a congregant a new way to see to ensure that I was not perpetuating this separation unknowingly. The Dr. Wendy Manuel Scott, a member of my congregation and also a professor and head of the Department of African American Studies and the Diaspora at the local George Mason College, was speaking with me about privilege. We were talking about how we could set up this retreat that we were doing for individuals, a retreat on undoing racism. How will we set this up well? And I said, Wendy, I think where we need to begin is by explaining, especially to the white audience, that we have a whole lot of privilege. I said, we need to talk about how white people have privilege and people of color do not have privilege. We need to set it up that way or we're going to fail. And Wendy said, stop right there. She said, I have privileges. You have privileges. It is much more complicated than that. We're not dealing with one dichotomy. We're dealing with multiple intersecting identities which afford privileges or take them away. The young boy in the laundromat would have understood that from Wendy. Skin color is part of the equation, so is age, economic power, ability, sexual orientation, gender, and on and on. You know this, right? But what does this mean for our commitment to one another? How do we keep our eyes wide open to the valuations that construct our inequitable world so that we might do the work to deconstruct them in such a way that doesn't hurt some while it heals others? Today, the buzzword is intersectionality. You may have heard of this. You may not have heard of this. Intersectionality proclaims that so-called categories of race and gender cannot meaningfully exist apart from one another because they mutually construct one another. Before the concept of intersectionality was brought into our lexicon, and this work began with Audre Lorde and even perhaps before that, what we understood was just margins and the center. That there are people who are on the margins of society with no privilege, and that we had to bring them to the center of society so that they could be heard and understood, so that we could bear witness to their truth. The project was about those on the outside and those on the inside. But now we are beginning to see, we've been seeing for a while, but many across our society are beginning to see that there are intersections of identities and oppressions, that it is much more complex than the margins and the center, that there are multiple margins and multiple centers. It is much more complex, and necessarily so. The names that we're sharing today, and this truth, I'm going to tell you, it makes the work much more complex for me as a white woman. Without this, I could just have unconsidered solidarity with other women, all women. I could just imagine that all of our struggles were the same and speak about it that way. But there are valuations that break apart the human family. There are differences in access to support. There are challenges to freedoms that I will never experience. There are privileges that I will always have. I have to keep my eyes wide open, or the work for my own deliverance will stifle that of my kin. We have so many groups in this congregation that do the wonderful work of binding women together. There's the Women's March Covenant group. There's the Women's group. There's the Leaders Retreat for those who identify as women. There's Cakes for the Queen of Heaven groups. There's probably even more that I'm not aware of. In these groups, we have to do the work of keeping our eyes wide open, or we will perpetuate one oppression while attempting to mitigate another. I don't believe that the greatest threat to the transformation of our society is in the terrorists that march with torches in Charlottesville. The greatest threat is the way our particular pain can blind us to the particular pain of others. How do we make all of these groups speak to an intersectional awareness? How do we create space in all of these groups for every experience to be heard and seen, and to be used to transform the way the group works? Police fatally shot Alexia Christian while she was being handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser. And police officers shot and killed Megan Hockaday, a young mother of 3 within 20 seconds of entering her home in response to a domestic disturbance. Say her name, Alexia Christian. Alexia Christian. Say her name, Megan Hockaday. Megan Hockaday. We say the names to defy blindness. We say the names to make us vulnerable. We say the names to obliterate the separation, to decry the division between us and them. Alexia Christian, Megan Hockaday, Keisha Michael, Corin Gaines, Natasha McKenna. We say the names to bring them here into this privileged space of worship. We bring them here into this space where we pray, where we have the power to articulate the boundary between sacred and secular. We bring them here into this space where we are empowered to draw the circle thin or wide. And here today, we say the names to declare that these are children of God, children of the universe, children of a holiness or a universe to which none of us are alien. We say the names to bring them up here, right here on this chancel where we name our children, where we bless our dead. We say the names so that when we see them out there, when we see them pulled over by the police or bashed by their husband, when we see them harassed, ignored, silenced, when we see them without a name, we will have become vulnerable enough to see and hear the pain, vulnerable enough to know that we must intervene. Because their pain is our pain. Because their name is our name, because our freedom is bound up with their own. Amen. And may it be so.